January 15, 2009, 3:24 in the afternoon, LaGuardia Airport, New York City. An Airbus A320 lifts off runway 4, climbing out over Queens into a clear winter sky, 10 miles visibility. U.S. Airways Flight 1549, bound first for Charlotte, then Seattle. On board, 150 passengers, 1 a lap infant, 5 crew. Nothing about the departure is unusual. Thursday afternoon, people check phones, settle into seats, already thinking about the meetings and family dinners waiting on the other end. In the cockpit, the first officer has the controls, a routine climb. He's flown it hundreds of times on hundreds of other jets. But nobody on board knows this. Flight records will show it's the first time he's ever flown this exact aircraft type, in a career spanning 15,000 hours in the air. Less than 2 minutes into the climb, at just under 2,900 feet, that stops mattering. Because filling the windshield is a shape neither pilot expects. Not this high, not this fast, not this close. You already know how this story ends. Everyone survives. The plane lands on a river. It becomes a miracle. But the investigation that followed spent over a year taking that word apart. Underneath it, a story that isn't quite the one you've heard. Some of it more remarkable than the legend. Some of it far closer to catastrophe than anyone ever let on. What fills the windshield isn't another aircraft. It's birds, a flock of Canada geese, identified later through engine tissue DNA, has flown straight into Flight 1549's climb path. The windshield goes dark. Passengers hear several loud thuds, then a shudder through the frame. In the cockpit, both engines spool down almost together, thrust gone, on an airplane climbing over one of the most densely populated cities on Earth. Sullenberger takes the controls. Skiles begins the checklist for a dual-engine failure, 3 pages, written to be worked through calmly at altitude. Less than 30 seconds after the strike, 3 words no controller wants to hear: Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Air traffic controller Patrick Harten clears a runway back at LaGuardia before the sentence even finishes. On paper, it should work. Investigators will later run this exact scenario more than a dozen times in a flight simulator with real A320 pilots just to see if it's possible. Right now, none of that matters. What matters is a clock nobody in that cockpit can see. From bird strike to touchdown, one way or another, 208 seconds. Every one of them will be studied for years. If you want to understand what actually happens inside those seconds, not the version everyone already knows, hit like and subscribe now, because what this crew does next is the part almost no one gets right in the retelling. 15 seconds. That's how long it takes Sullenberger to get an answer back from the controller. Turn left, heading 220, cleared to land, runway 13, back at LaGuardia. On paper, the obvious call. In practice, Sullenberger is already running math no simulator prepared him for. An Airbus A320 with both engines dead doesn't fly, it glides, and gliding costs altitude with every second, every turn. He's a little under 3,000 feet, several miles out, and turning burns off exactly the height he doesn't have to spare. It's the kind of engine-out scenario pilots train for at cruising altitude, with minutes to work the problem. Right now, he has neither the altitude nor the minutes. "We're unable," he tells the controller. "We may end up in the Hudson." The tower scrambles. Someone halts all other departures. A second option comes up fast: Teterboro Airport, across the river in New Jersey. Close enough that controllers start clearing a runway there, too. For a few seconds, Teterboro looks possible. Sullenberger asks about it, considers it. Then, "We can't do it." No real third option left to weigh, just the river directly ahead, already visible through the windshield, wide, flat, and nothing like a runway. "We're going in the Hudson," is the last transmission LaGuardia hears from the aircraft. The controller, who spent the last 2 minutes trying to get this plane on the ground, says simply, "Say again," and hears nothing back. Over the PA, Sullenberger says 4 words. This is the captain. Brace for impact. In the cabin, the flight attendants pick it up instantly, chanting in unison, "Brace, brace, brace, heads down, stay down." In the final seconds before impact, the computer that flies this airplane is still fighting for control. The A320 is fly-by-wire. Sullenberger's inputs don't move the control surfaces directly. They pass through flight control computers that limit how hard he can pull back, a safeguard built to keep the airframe from being overstressed in ordinary flying. On a river, with no engines and seconds of altitude left, that same protection means he can't pull the nose up as far or as late as he wants. He gets close, not perfect. At just before 3:31 p.m., traveling at roughly 125 knots, the Airbus touches the Hudson River, nose slightly up, its glide ending near the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in Midtown Manhattan. For a moment, it looks almost gentle, an airplane easing onto water the way it might ease onto a runway. It isn't. The angle of attack at touchdown is higher than intended, the impact harder than planned. The left engine tears away from its mount entirely. Below the waterline, the aft fuselage buckles and splits open. Cold Hudson River water pours into the back of the cabin within seconds. There's one button in this cockpit built for exactly this scenario, a single switch that seals vents and valves below the waterline to slow flooding. Nobody has time to reach for it. The plane is down. It hasn't finished sinking, and 155 people now have only minutes to get out. The order comes fast. Evacuate. This way. Leave everything behind. At the back of the plane, flight attendant Doreen Welsh is already badly hurt. On impact, a structural support beam punched up through the cabin floor near her jump seat, tearing a deep gash into her leg. The aft doors are useless anyway. Water is pouring through the breached fuselage so fast that both rear slide rafts can't be deployed. Bleeding, Welsh still gets up and starts moving passengers forward toward the working exits, because right now, that's the job. At the front, the 2 forward doors and the overwing exits become the only way out. One slide raft has to be inflated by hand after the automatic system fails, costing precious seconds. Sullenberger and Skiles pull spare life vests from under empty seats and hand them to people already standing on the wings. Here's what almost nobody remembers about this evacuation. It wasn't the calm, life-vested exodus people picture. NTSB investigators later found that only about 10 of the 150 passengers grabbed a life vest on their way out. Just 77 thought to grab a floating seat cushion. Most people simply ran. Outside, wind chill drags the air down to around 2 degrees Fahrenheit over a river sitting at roughly 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Passengers standing on the wings have water up to their waists within 2 minutes. Nobody drowns, but for several very cold minutes, that outcome is nowhere near guaranteed. It comes down to how fast help can reach the river. Help arrives faster than almost anyone has a right to expect. The first commuter ferry reaches the plane within about 3 minutes of it hitting the water. Ferry captains running the Hudson that afternoon see the landing happen in real time and turn their boats toward it immediately. Within roughly 10 minutes, 7 ferries are on scene, joined by an FDNY fire rescue boat and 2 Coast Guard boats. Deckhands throw ropes and life rings to people standing chest deep in freezing water on the wings,
or clinging to the two inflated slide rafts at the front of the plane. About 64 people are pulled off those rafts. Roughly 87 more are lifted off the wings and the emergency ramps still attached to the fuselage. A few slip into the Hudson itself and are hauled out before the cold water can do real damage. Inside the sinking aircraft, Sullenberger walks the length of the cabin twice, calling out, checking under seats, before he's satisfied no one has been left behind. He's the last person off the airplane.
All 155 people who boarded Flight 1549 that afternoon are accounted for. 1 flight attendant and 4 passengers are seriously injured. Nobody dies. An NTSB official will later call it the most successful ditching in aviation history. New York's governor calls it something simpler, a miracle. If you'd been standing on that wing in that water, what's the first thing you think you'd have done? Tell me in the comments, because what investigators found afterward about who actually survived and why isn't quite what most people assume. For 15 months, investigators worked to answer the one question everyone kept asking: could Sullenberger have made it back to LaGuardia? At first, the numbers looked bad for him. Test pilots, given the same scenario in a simulator, turned back the instant the birds hit and landed safely. Easy to conclude the ditching hadn't been necessary at all. Except that left something out: reality. No real crew decides anything instantly. Recognizing a failure, understanding it, choosing a plan, all of it takes time. When investigators reran the scenario with a 35-second delay built in to account for that reaction time, the simulated aircraft came down short of the runway. There's a second detail almost nobody mentions. The emergency checklist Skiles was working through in those first seconds, 3 pages for a dual-engine failure, had been written for one specific situation: a jet at cruising altitude with thousands of feet and several minutes to spare. Flight 1549 had neither. Years later, a Hollywood film would dramatize this hearing as a fight. Investigators cast as villains trying to pin the ditching on pilot error. Real NTSB officials pushed back once the movie came out. What actually happened in that room was narrower, less dramatic, a technical argument over whether one simulator run, missing any allowance for human reaction time, could fairly answer a question this serious. The NTSB's final ruling wasn't that Sullenberger got lucky. It was that ditching gave everyone on board the highest probability of survival, given exactly what he had and exactly what he didn't. 15 months of simulations, hearings, and flight data to confirm what he'd decided correctly in under 4 minutes. Here's what almost never makes it into the retelling. This accident should have been survivable by design, not just by chance. At the time, jet engines only had to prove they could survive ingesting a single 4-pound bird to earn certification. Smithsonian scientists later analyzed feather and tissue residue pulled from both engines, some recovered from an engine that sat on the riverbed for 9 days, and found the geese that hit Flight 1549 weighed close to 8 pounds each. Both engines ingested at least 2. The birds broke the rulebook by weight alone, more than 4 times over in each engine. DNA testing revealed something else nobody expected. These weren't the resident Canada geese that nest year-round around New York's parks and reservoirs. They were migratory birds, genetically distinct, passing through from breeding grounds as far away as Labrador. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Resident geese can be managed locally through population control near airports. Migratory flocks passing overhead at altitude cannot. There's one more finding investigators flagged, quieter than the others, but just as telling. The engines had no way to tell the crew they were too damaged to ever restart. So for critical seconds, Skiles worked a checklist trying to relight engines
that could never fly again. Seconds that, on a lower, less forgiving flight path, might not have existed to spend. None of this makes what happened anyone's fault. It makes it something rarer, a disaster that revealed exactly where the safety margins had never been tested and exactly what needed to change. Not everyone who lived through this story was on the plane. In the control tower, Patrick Harten had guided Flight 1549 through its final transmission and then lost radar contact entirely. For a few unbearable minutes, he believed he'd just listened to 155 people die. Too shaken to call his wife, he texted her instead. He didn't return to work for weeks.
Back on the aircraft, not every injury came from something going wrong. 2 passengers suffered shoulder fractures from doing exactly what they were trained to do. Investigators traced it to the brace position itself, built around older seats designed to give way on impact. These seats didn't have that feature. Bracing against them the standard way may have caused the very injuries it was meant to prevent. An uncomfortable finding. Safety guidance can quietly fall out of date even when everyone follows it correctly. The fallout unfolded over years, not months. New York's Parks Department began removing Canada geese from public land near the city's airports almost immediately. Tens of thousands of them over the following decade. The NTSB's recommendation to test engines against birds at real climb speed, not full throttle, eventually became binding law. But not until 2023, 14 years after Flight 1549 went down. Airports nationwide also sought tighter wildlife hazard assessment rules. Nobody becomes this calm by accident. Long before January 15, 2009, Sullenberger had spent decades quietly rehearsing for exactly this kind of morning without knowing it. He'd trained as a glider pilot and instructor, learning how to fly without an engine at all. He'd sat on accident investigation boards for the Air Force and the NTSB, studying other people's worst days for a living. 2 years earlier, he'd founded his own aviation safety consulting firm. On the day it mattered, none of that showed up as heroics. It showed up as a man doing a job he'd prepared his whole career for, one decision at a time, in total silence where 2 engines used to be. The aircraft itself, tail number N106US, never flew again. It's on permanent display today at what's now called the Sullenberger Aviation Museum in Charlotte, the flight's original destination it never reached that afternoon. What actually happened over the Hudson River wasn't luck, and it wasn't quite the flawless fairy tale either. It was training, timing, imperfect equipment, and a group of ordinary people on the water and in the air who simply didn't have time to be anything but competent. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the real version, not the highlight reel, subscribing and dropping a comment tells me to keep finding them. And if you want to see the other end of what aviation can survive, watch Japan, the strongest single-plane crash in history, next. It's a very different story than this one, and it will change how you think about this one.